And welcome back to another podcast with Mr. Hagan, and we're going to continue on this podcast talking about unemployment. We were talking about on the previous podcast the idea of the natural unemployment, and we want to continue. We said there were two types of natural unemployment. They were frictional and structural, and we want to talk on this video about structural unemployment. And I said before, the structural unemployment is generally the result of, for some reason, workers having a lack of skills that are desired in the marketplace, or that wages for some reason are above equilibrium, and this creates a mismatch between the number of people who want a job and the number of jobs actually available. So let's look at, there are generally three causes for structural unemployment. So here's our first one we're going to look at. Let's just get this out of the way. So the first one is the minimum wage. So these are the reasons for structural unemployment, and they're based on either the quantity of workers being supplied being greater than the quantity of workers demanded. That happens from wages being above equilibrium, and I should have here at the end, I should have added here, or workers for some reason lack the skills that are desired. So skills is also a problem, or the lack of skills is a problem, and we'll talk about that one at the end. So let's talk about one of the first causes of structural unemployment is minimum wage. So what is a minimum wage? Well, let's look at this supply and demand graph. So on this supply and demand graph, we have down here is the quantity of the good labor. So this is the quantity of labor on the horizontal axis. And then on the vertical axis, we have wages, or wages really just are the price of labor. So if somebody gets paid a wage of $50,000 a year, then the price of that labor is $50,000 per year. The wage and the price, that means the same thing. It's the price of the worker is called a wage. Now, if the market is in equilibrium, there's a upward sloping supply curve and a downward sloping demand curve for labor. If the market's in equilibrium, there's going to be an equilibrium price or an equilibrium wage, just like there always is at P1, and there'll be an equilibrium quantity at Q1. And then this supply curve, keep in mind, the supply curve here, this is these are the workers. The supply curve represents the workers who are looking for work, and the demand curve represents the firms who want to hire the workers. You can think of them as buying workers. They are demanding workers. So at equilibrium of Q1, then we would say the quantity of workers demanded by firms is exactly equal to the quantity of workers supplied. So the number of people who want jobs is equal to the number of jobs that are available, and then we have no problem. Everybody gets hired. But if the government comes along and sets a minimum wage, and I'm not saying whether they should or shouldn't, but if they do set a minimum wage, I'll call that a wage floor, right? A wage floor, or you could call it a price floor. If they set a minimum wage right here, well, now what's going to happen? If they set the minimum wage, then wages cannot go below this point. They can't go below this wage right here, whatever that wage happens to be. And what are the results of that? Well, now at this higher wage, the quantity of workers, the quantity of people wanting to work who are now going to look for jobs is going to rise. There's going to be an increase in the quantity of workers supplied in the market. So, it might have been at $7 an hour or something, some guy was, willing to sit at home on his couch and play video games or something. But if the minimum wage gets raised to $10 an hour, then he says, well, I ought to get off my couch and go try to get a job for $10 an hour. So more people will be out there trying to find jobs. And then on the other hand, the quantity of workers demanded will decline. The quantity demanded will go down. That is to say, firms will not want to hire as many workers as they did before. Maybe they'll replace some of their workers with machines or technology or something along those lines. So as a result of that, if the government passes a minimum wage law, then the quantity of workers supplied will be greater than the quantity of workers demanded. And we talked about this on a previous podcast when we talked about price controls in the price control playlist. If the quantity of workers supplied is greater than the quantity of workers demanded, then that's called unemployment. Those workers will be unemployed. So that's called unemployment. Those workers will be unemployed. And so that is an example of structural unemployment. That is structural unemployment. So in this case, the structural unemployment is a result of the wage being, incorrect. That's really not a fair word. That's kind of normative. It's a result of the wage being above equilibrium. That's the better way to say it. So that's the first cause of structural unemployment. The second possible cause of structural unemployment is what are called efficiency wages. So efficiency wages, it's really, I didn't draw a graph for this because it's exactly the same. It would be the exact same graph as I just drew with the minimum wage, only the government isn't making the companies raise their wages. They are doing it voluntarily. The companies voluntarily pay a wage above equilibrium. They voluntarily pay a wage above equilibrium. Those are called efficiency wages. And the reason why why would a firm ever do this? Why would they ever pay a worker above the equilibrium wage? Why would they do that? Because there's a belief that will cause workers to be more efficient. Firms will operate more efficiently if they set the wages above equilibrium. Okay, that will in some way increase worker productivity. What would be the reason for this? Well, there's a couple reasons. I wrote 4 here. This should be 3. There's actually more than 3, but 3 that I'm going to focus on. One, if workers get paid more, then they'll have more money to buy, more healthy food, things like this. And so if they're better paid, they will have healthier diets, and a healthier worker is a more productive worker. And this is probably more true in less developed countries, in countries that have lower incomes, but I don't know. It might be partially true also in wealthier countries. Number 2, the second is worker turnover. So worker turnover is very, very costly for companies. So if they hold their wages above equilibrium, if they increase their wages above equilibrium, that will decrease the number of workers who want to leave the firm. I mean, if you're getting paid more than the equilibrium wage, then you're not going to want to quit your job. Okay? If you're getting paid at the equilibrium wage and you lose your job and go work for another company, it's no big deal. But if you're getting paid an efficiency wage, that means you're getting paid above the equilibrium wage that all the other workers are getting. Well, you're not going to want to leave the firm now. You're going to want to stick with that company because they're paying you more, and that will reduce turnover. Okay, that will reduce turnover. And maybe I should say what I mean by turnover. Turnover is having to hire new workers all the time. I hire a worker, 12 months later he quits, I have to hire another. That's turnover. But if I pay them a wage above equilibrium, then that will reduce my turnover. I'm not going to have workers quitting all the time and having to hire new ones. And turnover is costly. I have to retrain the workers. I have to find them and hire them. That's a costly thing to do. So worker turnover is a problem, and we can reduce it by paying efficiency wages. And then finally, worker effort. So if we pay workers more, monitoring workers is difficult to make sure that they're actually working. But if I pay them more, if I pay them higher wages, then that increases the opportunity cost of shirking. Shirking means not working very hard. You're supposed to be, loading boxes on a truck, but instead you're in the back of the truck sitting down, taking a break, whatever. And if you're getting paid, just an equilibrium wage, you're not getting paid a lot, you're like, you sit down and shirk, and the guy threatens to fire you if he catches you, and it's like, well, big deal, right? Let him fire me, I'll go get a job with another company putting boxes on trucks. But if you pay me a higher wage above the equilibrium to put boxes on a truck, now I don't want to lose that job. I'm making more than other people doing a similar job. I'm making these efficiency wages. I'm making these higher wages, and so I'm going to be willing to work harder to make sure that I don't lose that job. So getting caught shirking would become very costly because I would be fired, and then I'd have to go get another job making the equilibrium wage, which means I'd be making a lower wage, and I don't want to do that. So this will decrease shirking. Workers will work harder. So let me say that again. You'll have healthier workers if you pay efficiency wages above equilibrium. You will have lower worker turnover if you pay efficiency wages, and the workers will work harder. Did I just say that wrong? Let me just say that one more time. I'm not sure if I did. The workers will be healthier. They can afford better diets. They're less likely to quit. You'll have lower worker turnover, and the workers will work harder. So those are the advantages of efficiency wages. But the problem is, remember, that at efficiency wages above equilibrium, the quantity of workers supplied will be greater than the quantity of workers demanded, and that will create unemployment. Okay, that'll create unemployment. And then finally, the last cause of structural unemployment is skills mismatch. And this happens oftentimes when there's a sudden change in demand for a product, like when the typewriter industry got replaced by computers, and all of a sudden somebody who was an expert on typewriter ribbons or whatever, was a typewriter repairman or something like this, and all of a sudden those skills for the typewriter industry, all of a sudden they're no longer necessary. So now you have a skills mismatch. Companies don't want to hire people who have skills working with typewriters anymore. They want to hire people with skills in the computer industry. So all of a sudden, these old typewriter workers, all of a sudden, their skills are no longer desired in the marketplace. That is a skills mismatch. Those workers are going to lose their jobs, and they're not going to be able to find new ones because they don't have the skills that are desired. That's a skills mismatch. This skills mismatch can also be the result, and this is kind of the same thing, but when new technologies are developed, maybe safe self-driving cars someday is going to reduce the demand for taxi drivers. The skills that are involved in doing that job are going to become irrelevant. Nobody's going to care anymore about those skills, and so as a result of that, those drivers will become unemployed. They lack the skills to get another job, and so they are structurally unemployed. So the key to all of this, let me say this one more time, the key to structural unemployment is that for some reason, either high wages or lacking skills, one of those two causes people to be unemployed, and they're not going to go find a job. And that's really the problem. You see, it's a long-term problem because the quantity supplied is greater than the quantity demanded. They're not going to find a job. If you're unemployed facing a minimum wage, you're not going to find a job because the quantity supplied is greater than the quantity demanded. There's going to be people unemployed. If there's efficiency wages, then the wage will be held above equilibrium and the quantity supplied will be greater than the quantity demanded. So the people who are unemployed, they're not going to find a job. Or if they lack the skills, if there's a skills mismatch, they're going to be unemployed. They're not going to find the job. And this is why I say that structural unemployment is more of a long-term problem than frictional unemployment. That was a lot that I just threw at you. I'll do a little summary of that on a future video. Sorry for how long this video was. This has been Mr. Hagan with another podcast, and we'll see you on the next podcast.